Just a couple of reminders. If you could please place your mic on mute. That's found at the left-hand bottom of your screen. When you want to ask questions, you'll have to make sure to unmute yourself, or you can ask the question in the chat box. Or there was a link in your email registration that you could submit any questions to info@nationalfund.org. I'm happy to have you all here today with two of my favorite colleagues, Brent Parton from New America and Elizabeth Standafer from the North Carolina Community College System. We are going to be talking to you today about how to replicate youth apprenticeship models. Brent's going to be talking to you about a new national partnership that the National Fund is also involved in, the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeships. Dr. Standafer will be talking about models in North Carolina where we've had great success with youth apprenticeships. And then I'll be talking to you about a model that we've created to actually recruit, screen, and test high school students into youth apprenticeship programs. Next slide. So I'm going to turn this over to Brent, my colleague, to talk to you about a new national initiative, the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship. Brent? Brent, you may be on mute.
Thank you, Pam. Can you all hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present. Appreciate the introduction, Pam. It's exciting to speak with you all today about the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about how this initiative started, what this initiative is all about, trying to achieve, as well as some of the immediate opportunities to explore possible collaboration with the partners. Next slide, please. So the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship is a multi-year initiative that will support efforts in states and cities to expand access to high-quality apprenticeship opportunities for high school age youth. That's the top line of what it's all about. But what the initiative is behind it, it tries to articulate a vision for what the potential of youth apprenticeship in the country can be. So we believe as a partnership that expanding youth apprenticeship programs is really a strategy for building a more inclusive economy, connecting the needs of students with the talent needs of industry. This is information that I'm sure is familiar to many of you out there in the National Fund universe, that we see great potential in building more high quality career pathways that are broadly accessible by a range of populations, but building them in specifically around apprenticeship models and building them for youth requires attention to a couple things. One, what do we even mean by what a youth apprenticeship is? So we'll talk a little bit about that. But also, how do you go about building youth apprenticeships that are often inspired by models from abroad in places like Switzerland and Germany, but doing it in the US context? And these are things that the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship are seeking to tackle, is really trying to build a common vision for what high quality youth apprenticeship means in the United States and what success would look like. What are the outcomes it seeks to achieve for regional economies, but most importantly, the young people and the industries within those economies to thrive. Next slide, please. The Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship really began back in 2017. Where I work, it's an organization called New America. We are a Washington, D.C. based research policy organization. We work on a range of issues. And in particular, where I sit is called the Center on Education and Skills. And we conduct regular research into how education connects with economic opportunity in this country. We do a tremendous work on apprenticeship broadly, but specifically, we actually back in 2017 launched a research project to look at the idea of youth apprenticeship. I'm sure many of the folks in this line know, often we see high-level political or industry leaders going abroad, going to see programs in other countries where you have large amounts. For example, in Switzerland and Germany, you have over 50 to 70% of people graduating high school participating in these earn and learn programs and experiences for often 2 to 3 years, before then choosing to take on work in that industry sector as part of their future or continuing their education. And these systems have served to inspire many U.S. policymakers, not just today, but going back several decades. And so what our research tried to answer the question is simply, why not here? Why have these models of youth apprenticeship not worked here? Why is the idea of connecting high school students to an apprenticeship seemingly a controversial or even radical idea? And more importantly, where it exists, how has it come together, and what are some of the barriers for scale? That was a lot of questions. That's why it took a year for us to dig into these findings. Back in December 2017, we released the report, Youth Apprenticeship in America Today, where there were really 5 top-line findings I'll share with you here in brief. Of course, only in brief, because I don't want to discourage you from reading our report. But number 1, we found that the idea of youth apprenticeship, which is really this idea of students being able to start a post-secondary earn and learn experience before they graduate high school, is actually deeply aligned with a lot of the education workforce trends in our country today. You look at on the education side, we're facing tremendous challenges around post-secondary attainment, have huge equity gaps in particular at the community college and technical college level. The affordability of that education is at the forefront of a lot of public policy and kitchen table dialogues, as is the issue around the relevance of education, and that if one completes, will they have the skills, the networks that they need to connect with opportunity in the labor market? Meanwhile, on the demand side of the ledger, we have a lot of big picture trends related to employers struggling to fill key talent gaps. We often hear this as sort of short-term skills gaps, but when we look actually at the broader structural trends, often driven by demographics in our labor market, employers are in a tight place. Many are facing aging workforces and trying to look for new ways to connect with young talent. Other industries face critical diversity challenges and are finding ways to build social capital and connect with a workforce they have not particularly been able to connect with in the past. Youth apprenticeship runs along all these streams. We documented many of these economic and education trends, things also around the expanded interest in apprenticeship wholesale, the expanded interest in work-based learning and career readiness for young people, as well as on the employer side, trying to think about how they can kind of build a more sustainable talent pipeline in their own backyard and connect with local talent and retain local talent. We chronicle all these trends, and we actually found just the top line issue that youth apprenticeship shouldn't really be seen as a radical idea when you look at the broader challenges we're facing in our labor market and in our education. The second piece, though, is that we wanted to ask students and parents themselves what they thought. We conducted extensive focus groups and polling work over the course of 2017. We've published all those results, and those are again accessible in the report and our website. But the top line was this, is that students and parents in the United States are actually, there's not this knee-jerk reaction against the idea of apprenticeship. In fact, the term apprenticeship has a pretty good brand in terms of how it can help support people to connect with good jobs and good opportunities. The problem is that young people, as well as parents, really need to see it as a way to and through higher education and not an alternative. No doubt we have a strong college for all culture in this country, not to make one type of judgment one way or another on that. We have to realize that people have ambitions and want more options when it comes to their post-secondary opportunity, and youth apprenticeship falls squarely within that. But they also want to know that those options aren't going to be dead ends, that they have the ability to build on those experiences over time. And that has both program and policy design issues that we can talk about in just a second for what high quality youth apprenticeship means. The other findings related to sort of what we found from both literature reviews, case studies, and an extensive sort of landscape scan. We found youth apprenticeship does indeed exist in the United States. It's out there. There are really great examples. We did 3 in-depth case studies. One was of where Elizabeth in North Carolina talked about the great work that's happened there that Pam has been a part of as well. We also profiled what's going on in Colorado, as well as Wisconsin, which has been a program, the statewide program that's been around really since the school to work days of the 1990s. And we tried to show there's not only one way to go about building a systemic approach to youth apprenticeship programs, but states are key elements in helping do that. But there's really an interplay between states and regional action. And Elizabeth will talk a little bit more about that in North Carolina. Finally, we profiled and identified some potential strategies for scale, as well as reflected on the history issues here of what it would mean for youth apprenticeship to be scaled in the U.S. And I only bring this up from the standpoint of the importance of equity in particular. We do have a history of racial tracking in vocational education in the United States. There are understandable concerns that youth apprenticeship could sort of reinvigorate that tracking or at least play a role in doing that. But that's a broader conversation happening in career technical education broadly. However, our research, what we found that there might be other equity imperatives to be thinking about as well. These are actually highly lucrative opportunities where young people are earning several years of paid work experience, free college degrees alongside that. And the issue of making sure that young people who need these opportunities most, that it isn't just students who would have been going to college other way are able to take advantage of these opportunities, is a different but equally as important equity concern as we think about the potential of youth apprenticeship in the United States. Next slide, please. Our our report, I won't go through all these exhaustively here, profiled a number of the different diverse strategies that we see states pursuing to expand youth apprenticeship programs. And we have, again, those case studies as well as profiles of about 14 other states that are leading different types of strategies to expand youth apprenticeship. But we found some commonalities across those diverse strategies. One is the need for a clear framework to guide quality, consistency, and scale. Often this happens through the registered system, but not exclusively. Number two, industry-wide approaches. It's very hard to do one-off, one-employer youth apprenticeship programs, as in any apprenticeship program, quite frankly. It really helps to sort of bring together multiple employers, what we call a sector strategy, to ensure that the pooling of the risk across employers losing their investment, or importantly also harmonizing what are the types of skills and competencies they want to build to these opportunities, really makes it easier for the education partners to align around it when they're in multi-employer. We see policy being incredibly important for enabling the learning to happen through a youth apprenticeship program. That means letting people out of high school in the high school day. We also see it as something that also helps incent and ensure that learning is broadly recognized within post-secondary settings, both the learning that's happened on the job as well as in the classroom, so that we see actual transferable college credit accumulating to these programs, through these programs. And then finally, it's all about money. What is the right way for creating a sustainable financing model for the post-secondary instruction? It's a misnomer to think that youth apprenticeship programs are something that happens within the K-12 institutions. These are post-secondary pathways, very much built upon the framework of dual enrollment, CTE, or early college programs, as opposed to something that's about rewriting high school curricula. And I think you'll hear a little bit more about that, how that approach is being geared up in North Carolina. And then there's somebody that has to be able to do the work. There has to be a really clear intermediary capacity that's coordinating the partnership that these programs represent across post-secondary K-12 and industry. Next slide, please. So PAYA tried to identify a few of the gaps in the field. Excuse me. The report that we released identified a few of the gaps in the field that really shaped what the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship is seeking to address. One is this issue of consistency and quality. We don't have a clear legal definition of what youth apprenticeship is in the United States. So we knew that the partnership, in order to advance youth apprenticeship and see its expansion, would have to create a clear, consistent vision about what is a high-quality youth apprenticeship program, what does it look like, and what does success look like. And so one of the key PAYA objectives is to improve our awareness of high-quality youth apprenticeship, but to also understand we still have a lot to learn about how it works. And so by having more consistent definitions of what these programs look like, it makes it easier to assess what's working and what isn't. The second thing PAYA wanted to do is tackle this issue of fragmentation in the field of youth apprenticeship. There are examples of youth apprenticeship programs across this country. However, they are happening in large part in isolation, when there's a lot we could be learning from one another. So how we can better connect the practitioners on the ground who are interested in starting youth apprenticeship programs, as well as the ones that are heavily involved with implementing them, can really help us understand what are the conditions and strategies that are working. And then finally, we need more proofs of concept. Youth apprenticeship is a powerful strategy, but is an underutilized one in the United States in terms of preparing young people for a strong future. So we wanted to be able to support more high quality, what we call youth apprenticeship partnerships, to come together and better serve the participating employers, students, and communities. Next slide, please. The Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship is just that, a partnership. The National Fund for Workforce Solutions, we're proud to say, is one of our national partners, alongside 6 other national organizations that, of course, include New America, where I work, but also a mix of organizations that are leading networks of individuals at the state and local level to do the important career pathway systems change work. Groups like Advanced CTE, the JFF, the National Governors Association, Education Strategy Group, National Alliance of Partnerships and Equity. And in addition to partnering with these national organizations, we partner with groups like CareerWise Colorado and the Charleston Regional Youth Apprenticeship Programs, which have become these really de facto learning sites in the country where they have clear strategies to expand youth apprenticeship. People come to see how youth apprenticeship works, but importantly, to bring the practitioner voice to the table and how we create a more consistent vision for high quality programs in the future. Next slide, please. The partnership is also a partnership of multiple funding organizations. And the point to make here is that in addition to incredibly thanking them for all the work that they are supporting for the partnership to do, they've decided to make the commitment that part of the challenge in this field, again, is consistency and fragmentation. So by having these national funders come together to support a common vision for youth apprenticeship really helps drive that more consistent vision of what it would mean to create high quality youth apprenticeship programs and expand them in the country. Next slide, please. One of the key things that we brought out that we've been able to achieve over the past several months since the partnership officially launched back in October of last year is that we released national principles and a definition for high-quality youth apprenticeship. This took time to develop. It took a lot of intensive work with folks on the ground doing the work, as well as across the partnership, to arrive at, again, what do we mean when we say high-quality youth apprenticeship, and what should be the principles be for guiding the expansion of these programs so, again, they can achieve the outcomes we want them to achieve. Next slide, please. Very quickly through these principles, we outline what we, again, not only see as a high-quality youth apprenticeship program, but what defines what they achieve. And I just do want to touch on each one of these very quick before I wrap up here on the PAYA initiative. Is one, that youth apprenticeship is always going to be career-oriented. This is national principle one. And what we mean by that is that the learning itself is structured around knowledge, skills, and competencies that lead to family-supporting wages. Apprenticeship is a career pathway, so the youth apprenticeship programs themselves are not just about doing a job, even though they are a job, but they are about setting someone onto a trajectory to be able to advance in a career over time should they choose to. Number two, we want to be very clear about equity. High-quality youth apprenticeship programs are designed with equity at the center, meaning that the learning is accessible to every student that wants to participate, with important targeted supports for those that are inversely impacted by inequities within our education system and labor market. We have to be deliberate about designing programs for equity if we want them to achieve that. Next, portability. We want to ensure that for youth apprenticeship programs and apprenticeship broadly to work for young people, the learning itself that happens through a program needs to be integrated formally within our traditional higher education systems. This addresses that dead end issue, but also really drives on the point that youth apprenticeship is not an alternative to post-secondary education. It is a way to and through it, and it's one that we should all be thinking about and integrating within our systems. Number three, in addition to giving young people the options to build upon those credentials, that the learning that happens through apprenticeship programs is adaptable across an industry, that what happens and the skills one builds is not just limited to one employer, but that the skills and competencies are widely valued across an industry or sector. And finally, the issue of being accountable, that a high-quality youth apprenticeship program means that the student, employer, and program outcomes are being monitored by a clear center of accountability, often what's called an intermediary, that's using transparent metrics to oversee the whole experience itself and really support program improvement. This is a highly structured program, and it's one that's integrated. It requires someone overseeing that process. Next slide, please. One thing I did want to mention is that in addition to releasing these national principles, as well as the definition for high-quality youth apprenticeship, which I'm free to share with you as well, we did launch a grant initiative at the beginning of the year, where we are looking again to support emerging or existing partnerships across the country that are interested in expanding or strengthening high-quality youth apprenticeship programs. We'll be awarding about 4 to 8 grants. The final selection will be announced in May. The initial application is due March 8th. And they'll be receiving some modest funding of about $200,000 over the course of between May 2019 and October 2020 to support some initial planning activities and to really work on the initial strategy development implementation across a partnership. And that's just the key word I'll mention is we're looking to fund partnerships. Youth apprenticeship is a partnership across post-secondary, K-12, and industry, but there's also a number of other actors that could be importantly empowering that partnership as well. So if you have any interest in any information about the grant initiative, we have information available. Next slide, please. And here it is. Here at this site, you have links, and I'm sure these slides will be shared. You'll be able to see our report. You'll be able to read our definition and principles for high-quality youth apprenticeship, and you'll also be able to read about the grant initiative itself, including frequently asked questions. But for now, I will go ahead and stop and yield my time back to Pam to see where we go from there.
Thanks so much, Brent. Excellent presentation. As Brent noted, these will be available to you. We are recording the webinar, and we will be placing the link to the webinar on the National Fund website on the Apprenticeship Resources page. We have a webinar series there that you can access, so you will be able to access the slides at a later date. And if you have colleagues who couldn't join, make sure you help me let them know that. And so now I'll turn it over to Dr. Elizabeth Standafer. Elizabeth is the Youth Apprenticeship Coordinator for the North Carolina Community College System. I actually live and sit in North Carolina. We've had some great success with youth apprenticeships. And so I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth to talk to you about North Carolina and what's going on in youth apprenticeship space. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Pam, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about youth apprenticeship in North Carolina. Next slide, please. Youth apprenticeship in North Carolina has really emerged over the past 5 years. We have our state separated into prosperity zones, meaning that these are economic development regions that have similar impact on each other within the county. So here you can see what our programs are looking like right now in North Carolina. This data came yesterday. We have about 7,300 active apprentices. Of those, 2,100 or close to 2,200 are active youth apprentices. And within that, I don't have this statistic on this map, about 400 of them actually are in high schools. The reason that we capture it that way is because in our model, these students move from high school into post-secondary, and they are still considered youth apprentices because they did start in a high school program. We also have a military program. Our military consultant right now has about 476 active apprentices. And if you look down in the gray box, you'll see that we have 20 consortia across the state. One of them is a statewide consortia. It's actually in the masonry industry. And then we have 5 independent programs. And I'm going to talk to you today about consortia and independent programs and the advantages for each one. So altogether, we have about 25 youth programs that are currently registered and probably another 10 more that are emerging. They're in the planning process. Next slide. So how does this happen in North Carolina? Where do we get these ideas? Who's coming up with them? Ideas for apprenticeship and how it evolves in a local area or in a region are very specific to that region, no matter where the idea originates, whether it's from a community college partner, a community partner, an industry partner, or a K-12 partner. Registered apprenticeship is the end result. All processes lead to the same outcome. We're going to register programs for youth that lead from secondary to post-secondary. Next slide, please. I mentioned the partners that may have the idea that apprenticeship would be a good fit for their local area. If you look down at the bottom of this graphic that we have here, this kind of shows the relationships that we build here in North Carolina to ensure that we have success and buy-in from all people in a local region or all stakeholders. So you see it starts with industry, our employers, and they are connected to our education system. And this can be the K-12 core or career technical education curriculum. Our post-secondary institutions, whether they're community colleges, trade schools, or universities. And then our other training centers like NCCER. They're also connected to our community partners who help support our education system and our industries, including our workforce boards, economic development partners, chambers of commerce, and youth-serving organizations and community agencies like vocational rehab, the YMCA, United Way, people that are able to support youth programs. And of course, we have our local stakeholders at the bottom of this because they are the beneficiaries of this partnership, and it's vitally important that they are considered as part of the team when we start to think about apprenticeship and who we're going to serve. Then I put myself in the middle of the circle because my role is to help to convene all of these partners around the idea of apprenticeship for youth until it gets to a point where they're able to move forward on their own and they've really gotten some good structure to start the process. At that point, we start to work with our apprenticeship NC consultants who build the programs, who register them, and who help bring information about different training approaches that have been used for a specific industry sector or a specific job, curricula that might be appropriate, the certifications and credentials that could be embedded in the apprenticeship program, and then, of course, the apprenticeship standards that include the wage scale, the related education, and the on-the-job learning. Next slide, please. So once we have our partners defined and we know that we are going to work together and we want to move forward, one of the first questions that a local area in North Carolina starts to consider is, how do we want to move forward as a local area or a region? Do we want to consider looking at industry sector partnerships? Are we more interested in workforce development and apprenticeship as a partnership? Or do we have individual companies in a local area that want to develop their own program and move forward? So my bulk of my presentation today is going to be to really drill down into these three areas and talk about what we do in North Carolina. The first thing that I would want to say up front is that none of the models that I'll show you today are a requirement. I would call them more of a best practice, and because they are a best practice, it is what has really swept across the state here, because industry has supported industry across the state to implement these ideas. All right, next slide, please. So when we talk about an industry sector partnership, what exactly do we mean? We mean that multiple partners from one industry sector are going to come together around the idea of positions that are hard to fill, where there might be a skills gap or an interest gap. So it's very interesting that companies that at one time may have really been competitive for their employees are now working together to build a pool of employees for very specific skills. They always include their partners from their local education entities in these sector partnerships, and that might be their community college and their local K-12 system. And then they work together to create a pipeline for specific high-demand occupations, like I mentioned earlier. They combine resources to market to the community and the K-12 system, so they market together as a group. They market with the input from their local community colleges and their K-12 systems. And then the most important part of this is that as a group, they're able to leverage the community college for the related education courses they need. So for instance, if they needed some coursework for computer integrated machining, and they came together as an industry sector and said, we are positive that we will be able to yield this many seats for the community college if we're able to have this curriculum, they're able to get the courses they need, and a lot of times real flexibility in when these courses are offered. Many of our industry sector partnerships utilize a fiscal agent to manage funding for youth apprenticeship implementation. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next slide. So next slide. This is an example of an industry sector partnership that is actually in the county that I'm presenting from today. This is Alamance County in North Carolina. They started an industry sector partnership about 3 years ago around advanced manufacturing. You can see on the right side of the screen that they had some specific occupations that they wanted to train for. And you can see the list there. So that's one of the very first important decisions that has to be made is what apprenticeable occupation are we going to focus on? And is it going to be more than one? And what will that look like for us? You also see, if you look in the middle of the page where I have the other blue arrow near Apply Now, this little comment that they made on their webpage. The Career Accelerator Program is a 4-year training partnership between local manufacturing companies, Alamance Community College, and Alamance Burlington School System. And I think that is really what is critical about understanding industry sector partnerships, is that they are coming together with a whole host of other stakeholders, but they are local companies that are from one industry sector that are doing this work. I also wanted to bring to your attention, just down in the far right-hand corner, that on their website they also demonstrate their partnerships by showing the people that help support them. And you'll see at the very bottom that they have the Alamance Chamber of Commerce. That is their fiscal agent. And the reason that this industry sector partnership has a fiscal agent is that they chose to have a fee for partners that join the partnership. The fee is not required. It is decided upon by the members of the partnership. Some of them are anywhere from a couple of $100 to $1,000 to $1,500. And you're probably thinking, what is going on with that money? A lot of things happen with that money, particularly around marketing. So launching a website like the Career Accelerator Program has. I do just want to make a side note. This is a series of cut and paste that I made. Their actual webpage does not look exactly like this. It's much more congruent than what this looks like. But the Alamance Chamber helps to expend those funds for that. It might be for graduation ceremonies that they hold or signing ceremonies that they hold for the apprentices. It could be for their orientation that they hold, and Dr. Howells is going to talk about that recruiting tool later in the presentation. So they decide how much they would like to charge. The Alamance Chamber supports them with that. And the Alamance Chamber also supports them by holding meetings, convening with them and for them, and helping to bring on new partners. So let's go to the second type of partnership. Next slide. Guilford Apprenticeship Partners is an example of a group of people that originally started as an industry sector partnership model, but they started to move more toward a workforce development partnership. And what I mean by that is originally they started with a group of advanced manufacturers. There were about 8 of them. And today they have about 26 partners. And if you look under the portion of their website where it says our mission is to, number 1, bridge the gap between high school graduates and career opportunities in IT, cybersecurity, advanced manufacturing, service fields, and aviation mechanics. So what you can see here is that a group that originally started with the idea in mind that they would just be addressing advanced manufacturing and trying to get students into that field, these advanced manufacturers have now reached out to other industry sectors and have begun to have an industry partnership that involves multiple sectors. And again, you'll also see that in this model, they have involved their school system, they have involved their local community college, and they have a fiscal agent, the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro. What is interesting about Guilford Apprenticeship Partners and the Career Accelerator Program is that after they launched and they started to do work, they realized that their impact wasn't just about their local communities and what was happening in Guilford County and what was happening in Alamance County, but a much larger picture about what was happening in the region, because we all know that commuter patterns are a real thing and they really do impact economics in a region. People from the Guilford County area come to school in Alamance and vice versa. People in Alamance work in Guilford and vice versa. And those weren't the only counties where that was happening. Randolph County and Rockingham County are also counties that have industry sector partnerships, and they were also experiencing commuter pattern issues and thinking about how they might be able to better serve the people in their local area if they were to combine resources with other people in their region. As a result of that, the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro, the fiscal agent for Guilford Apprenticeship Partners, helped lead a grant writing experience in which these 4 counties, Rockingham, Randolph, Guilford, and Alamance, came together under an umbrella called the Eastern Triad Workforce Initiative to try to gain extra funding to implement apprenticeship strategies for youth in their region. And they were awarded a very large grant from North Carolina, and they have used it for things like marketing and offsetting costs for education. And so you can see that this idea about industry sector partnerships can become not only multiple industry sectors, but then it can also become regional as well. Okay, next slide. Just to get more specific about workforce development partnerships and why those might emerge versus an industry sector partnership, it really depends on the local area and what their goals are for apprenticeship. Multiple partners from diverse industry sectors come together under a workforce development partnership. They also include their partners from local education entities. They work together with a little bit different focus sometimes, and what often that focus is to keep local high school talent in the community to work, specifically in our rural areas where people move out, they go to school, they get some training, and they don't come back. So this is a really great model for a local area that might have limited industry where they want to retain their talent. Like the industry sector partnerships, the workforce development partnerships often leverage the community college for related education courses. Around our state, I've particularly seen this happen with pre-apprenticeship and with professional skills training. Oftentimes, because they have different industries and occupations, they come together around the idea of doing a pre-apprenticeship with high school students that is similar, so that they are able to gain the professional skills and training that they're looking for. And then the students are able to branch off into the specific sectors that interest them for the part that becomes their apprenticeship. These groups may or may not utilize a fiscal agent to manage their funding for youth apprenticeship, but they are very likely to work very closely with their economic development partners and their chambers of commerce and their workforce development boards. Although I mentioned that these types of partnerships often happen in rural areas, they also do happen in urban areas. In fact, our largest county in North Carolina in terms of population is also looking at a model that includes workforce development partnerships to include things from healthcare to IT to skilled trades. One thing about a workforce development partnership is that it may be a little bit more flexible to add new apprenticeable occupations, and it may have a little bit more flexibility in marketing because it casts a wider net. Okay, next slide. An example of one of our new workforce development projects is Wilkes Apprenticeship Program up in the mountain area of North Carolina. One thing that I wanted to bring to your attention, if you look at the blue arrow, this was an article that was written about them in their local newspaper. And one of the quotes that they said is, "We knew we wanted to participate in helping students who sought after a vocation." And so their idea there is they really want to train their students to have a skill. And they were one of the people that came to us and said, we want to figure out a way to retain our workforce and keep people here in Wilkes County. They had a group come together, and if you look in the middle of the page to the right, their initial participating companies are very diverse. They have industrial maintenance, they have cybersecurity, they have welders, they have manual machinists, press operators, and IT support technicians. So these companies came around the idea of working with youth in their local community around work-based learning initiatives, particularly apprenticeship. They started a pre-apprenticeship program that taught soft skills to these students and professional skills. And then these students were able to choose among these different options for their apprenticeship program. And they signed their first group up this past summer. And so they have current apprentices that are high school students who are working in 4 of these areas. Okay, next slide. Sometimes a workforce development partnership or an industry sector partnership just are not a good fit for a company, or a company may start out in one of those partnerships and realize that their size or their needs don't warrant being in a partnership with other companies, and that's certainly okay. We still work with them just as vigorously and support them. So this would be one industry with specific training needs or occupations to fill. Again, same partnerships, local community agencies, the local education entities. They are training local talent from their area high schools. Oftentimes, these independent programs do have maybe a specific high school or group of high schools that they're working with that are close in proximity. One of the big marquee things about a partnership that is independent is they really rely heavily on their education partners to market to the community and to the K-12 system, because remember, in the other types of situations, those partnerships could be funneling money in to do marketing together as a group. So they have to, in this model, rely more heavily on the K-12 system. Sometimes we have programs that are large enough to leverage the community college for related education because they host a large number of apprentices and they're able to get those seats in the coursework that they need. Typically, there will be no need for a fiscal agent for an independent youth program that's registered. And they may also be more flexible in being able to add new apprenticeable occupations because that is very specific to their company and what their needs are. So here's an example of an independent youth program that we have in North Carolina. Next slide. Caterpillar is in Lee County, and you'll notice that their information for their apprenticeship program is actually on the Lee County High School page. I took this screenshot of it yesterday, and this is how they are marketing to their students to gain interest and to get them to apply to be a potential apprentice for them. Caterpillar is very unique. They take about 15 apprentices per year. They do not guarantee that the apprentice will be hired by them at the end of their apprenticeship, but they do guarantee preferential hiring and preferential placement. So the company is big enough to be able to support enough students that they can have the seat time and the seats that they need at their local community college, and they run their own program in coordination with this particular high school. Okay, next slide. So just to recap, these are the emerging models that we're using here in North Carolina: industry sector partnerships, workforce development partnerships, and then independent youth programs. Next slide. These public-private partnerships support each other, but they also need support in funding. So this is just a little model that I made here. You'll see that some of the ideas that these groups have to make are around classroom instruction, on-the-job training, and wage progression, particularly when they're in a partnership. They have to agree on these things. And once that has been agreed upon, that is their marketing tool. They market to parents and students what they'll be learning, the level of education they'll get. It might be an associate's program, degree program, diploma, certificate. They will market to the students what they will be learning and the types of industries that they'll be able to work in. And then one of the big things, especially important to students and parents, is how much the students will be making, how their wages will progress. And that is a real big tool that these groups use to bring kids to the door. After those things are decided, the next thing that has to happen is those things have to be marketed to the students and the parents. So these groups work together to customize their marketing plan and to determine how they're going to recruit and screen, which is what Dr. Howes is going to talk about in just a few minutes. So all of these things are being worked on by industry partners, education partners, and community partners for the sake of the stakeholders. And I have those little icons there in the middle. These people have to determine what resources that they're going to be able to give to the group. Will it be time? Will it be resources in terms of facilities that people can use? Will it be actual money that they're able to contribute to making this partnership happen? But whatever is agreed upon, it is just important to realize that every part of the group has to do their part 100% of the time to carry the project forward. And it also is important for everyone in the group to determine whose resources are the best resources for which parts of the apprenticeship program that they're wanting to work on. Next slide. If you want to know more about our consortia across the state, you can go to www.apprenticeshipnc.com. We have a partners tab. You're able to access all of the programs that I talked about today on that site. And we also have more information about how we structure our partnerships. It's in our Youth Apprenticeship Guide also on our website. It is under the About tab at Resources. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Elizabeth. One thing I wanted to mention that North Carolina did about 2.5 years ago was created a tuition waiver for any high school youth that went into a registered apprenticeship program that makes all of their community college tuition free in North Carolina as long as they are in a registered apprenticeship program. So, you know, you can rally your state legislators if you're interested in doing something like that. Elizabeth and I could also be resources for you to help you figure out how to have that conversation with people who could do that for your state. Next slide. So one of the things I want to briefly talk about is apprenticeship is always employer-led, but oftentimes employers don't really know how to go about recruiting kids, screening them, and testing them into their processes. And so we have created a model here that you can replicate. I want to stress this is an employer-led model. This particular example is for advanced manufacturing, but it can be changed to really fall into any sector like IT, cybersecurity, healthcare. But really it starts with educator awareness, how to recruit, how to review your applicants, the college placement aspect of apprenticeship, mentor training, orientation, testing, pre-apprenticeship, and then a signing ceremony. And I'll talk briefly about each one of these. Next slide. So we've created a timeline here that really starts in September of the year before that you want to recruit apprentices. And you can see down along, I'm not going to talk about everything on the timeline because we're going to get to those individually, but this is sort of a process check for you if you're interested in doing this work, to work with your employers to say, here's what you need to be doing every month of the year before you want to start your program. Next slide. So in October, we encourage our employers to start with an educator awareness luncheon, and that's really inviting CTE teachers and principals, maybe even career counselors, to a company that will sponsor some apprenticeships and host a meal for those educators along with a facility tour. Oftentimes, many of these folks have never even been in a manufacturing facility. They think they're dark, dirty, and dingy, and they get to see all of the high-speed technology and the cleanliness of the facilities that they can go back and talk with their students about. And then we encourage our employers to really start recruiting in December prior to the next school year, and to host open houses at their facilities on Saturdays and make the students bring a parent or guardian and actually do a facility tour. And I've seen this with my own eyes. Some of these parents walk into these facilities and they ask, how can I get a job here? So it's really important because parents have great influence over their children and the decisions that the children will make about their futures. And so really getting the parents involved early on is critical. Next slide. And then we really encourage our employers to start physically recruiting at targeted high schools in January and February. And this is not the community college going out. This is not the National Fund going out. It is the employers collectively recruiting at the high schools to talk about the kinds of jobs they have, the kind of wages that they pay, and what kind of benefits that their employees get. And then college placement testing needs to take place in February because obviously if it's a community college related instruction apprenticeship, the students will have to take their classes at the local community college. And so they have to really pass that placement test to see where they might fall in terms of any developmental classes or training that they might have to take. We put this on the students' plate. It's their responsibility to schedule the placement test, to physically go to the college, to take the placement test, and then the student has to bring their placement test scores back to their sponsor company in the month of February so the company can start making determination about what kids they want to keep for the pre-apprenticeship program. Next slide. And then in orientation and testing, and this can easily be customized for any other sector, such as healthcare or IT, and the content in the orientation and testing should definitely match the skills and competencies that the employers have identified that they need for their apprentices to have. Next slide. So we do orientation and testing in April. We do it after school from 4 to 8 o'clock at night, so it's pretty intense. You can see here what we do on day one. We have them sign a rules contract. We talk about safety. We teach them some technical math. We talk about how to do conversions from metric to standard or standard to metric. They have a homework assignment every night in which they have to write a paper and turn it in the next day. And then we give them some hands-on with some precision measuring tools. Next slide. And the second day, we have them begin a project. They will do some hand filing, some light machining under close supervision, some sandblasting, hand tapping. They will actually be working on their project all 4 days, and it will be evaluated at the end. On day 3, they will actually complete their project and do a final assembly of the parts, which are usually provided by the member companies. A project evaluation will happen on how well they did, and then they'll be introduced to first and third angle projections or drawings. Next slide. On the 4th day, we do testing, and we get the HR managers involved in the testing component, depending on what the competencies are at each individual employer. But these are just some examples of testing that can be used, like the Ramsey Mechanical and the Predictive Index. Some companies have their own custom tests that they like to use that have already been validated on their workforce. And so if that's the desire of the employer, that's exactly what they will do. And then we have the companies and the students rank what companies that they would like to work for. So the students can pick from the companies that are involved in the partnership. They can rank their #1 choice and their last choice. And then those will be taken consideration at a later date. Next slide. Mentor training is very, very important in a youth apprenticeship program. So we've developed a 12-hour train the trainer for apprenticeship mentors to help them really know how to relate to these young people. We tested that pilot last August, in Guilford County with the Guilford Apprenticeship Partners. It was very popular with the mentors. They learned a lot about what they needed to know to be good mentors and how to be patient with these technologically savvy, iPhone addicted young people. Next slide. And then we invite the students for a pre-apprenticeship in their summer, either between their junior or senior year. They actually work for 6 weeks at the company. They get the week of July 4th off. They take 2 classes at the local community college in industrial safety and introduction to engineering. And then employer placements happen. They actually are paid for 40 hours that week. The employers actually pay them for their pre-apprenticeship. And of course, the tuition waiver pays for the classes that they take at the college. Next slide. And then we do something really cool. It's a signing ceremony of sorts, just like you would see at an athletic signing. If a student got a scholarship to play football, we actually do a signing ceremony for the kids that are invited into registered apprenticeship. It's very ceremonious. We invite the parents, the grandparents, the brothers, the sisters, community leaders, and dignitaries. And so it's really, we put on a big show for the students as they sign their USDOL paperwork. Next slide. And then in August, at the beginning of the school year, for both the high schools and the community colleges, they start their full apprenticeships. They actually start taking their course load at the community college. Depending on the employer desires, the employers decide what days they want the young people to be in the facility doing on-the-job training, and then what days they want the students to all be together at the community college to take their coursework. This is really a cohort model of education, which is very successful. And so the students actually start and they're getting paid and they're dual enrolled in both high school and community college. Next slide. So this is my contact information for those of you who are on the webinar. I'm also going to share Brent and Elizabeth's contact information with you again, but I do have a couple of questions in the chat box. So the question is, did you face a situation where at least 2 of those models pre-existed with a multi-county region where there were objections, concerns of competition, or structural obstacles to alignment? If so, were they able to agree around alignment, and how? If not, are there specific tactical steps that you could take to help improve alignment? Elizabeth, I think I'll hand that one to you because you were talking about multi-models and really if you want to chime in on that, and then I can help with you, maybe add some commentary.
Pam, is there a way I can see the questions since there are multiple?
Yeah, go to the bottom of your screen and hit the chat bubble.
Okay. All right. I'm looking. Okay. Did you face a situation where at least 2 of those models pre-existed with a multi-county region? So our regional concept has just started. The concept that I described with the Eastern Triad Workforce Initiative, actually all 4 of those counties have the same exact model, but within a county, we do have situations where we have a consortium of industry sectors. We have independent companies that have actually started or removed themselves from the original consortium and are running independent programs. And then we have leaders who say, hey, we want to expand apprenticeship outside of this advanced manufacturing consortium or this skilled trades consortium. Then we get together and let's talk about some of our target areas. So that does happen. I've not experienced concerns or objections to having different models in a region. Most of the competition questions and issues have come up actually in the industry sector partnerships, where there's still kind of that myth that they're going to be competing against each other. So the obstacles that we've overcome with that really is direct, clear communication, working together, forming together. And then the structural obstacles to alignment, I need a little bit of clarification about what that means. What type of structural obstacles?
So we can ask the person to maybe elaborate on that in the chat as we go to the next question from Matthew Feldman. How do these programs address racial equity? How do they overcome the transportation challenge of getting students to their jobs? I will tell you that this has been challenging, but we feel like we've conquered this in North Carolina by really recruiting from Title I schools. I would tell you that the diversity of the Guilford Apprenticeship Partners group in August was incredible. We are actually doing a study on racial equity into youth apprenticeship programs using that Guilford Apprenticeship Model's recruiting strategy. So hopefully in June we'll have a publication out that can help you really know how to address the equity issue. Transportation is definitely a problem in North Carolina. We definitely have more rural areas in the state with not a lot of public transportation, and so the employers have really stepped up to the challenge here. Oftentimes they will pay one of their apprentices who has a vehicle to transport the other apprentices with them to school and to work. They have thought about the idea of doing prepaid Uber cards. So I think the employers have really gotten creative and have tried very hard to address this issue. Many of the Guilford Apprenticeship Partners are not on the bus line at all, and so it can be difficult to get students there. But the employers are rising to the challenges and really working on innovative ways to get their students to work. So there's some clarification on that question, Elizabeth. The question was on funding stream or braided funding using WIOA money. Of course, we have the tuition waiver in North Carolina, but maybe other ways to use braided funding.
That has not really been an issue that has come up between different types of industry sectors. That is usually worked out within the industry sector, and most specifically with the individual industry and that apprentice regarding whether or not they qualify. WIOA is at the table with our apprenticeship groups, and they work out those issues individually. And I did want to add something about the transportation, particularly in our rural areas. Because
Elizabeth, can you turn your volume up?
I don't know. Is this better?
A little.
In our rural areas, because we have a dual enrollment program with our community colleges, we often are able to provide bus transportation to the community college for their coursework, because a lot of the communities are already busing students to the community college for our dual enrollment program, and they add apprenticeship into that piece.
Brent, here's a question for you from Hope Arthur in Cincinnati. It would be great to have Brent clarify if tuition course fees are allowable expenses under the PAYA grant. Along the same lines, in reading through the slides again from the PAYA release webinar, it appears that the largest expenses to be covered would likely be administrative cost, travel, convening, and any setup needs. Does that match what New America is expecting? And Brent, you may be, are you there?
Can you hear me, Pam?
Yes.
Yes, I would start with the second question. I would say that's accurate, that the level of funding that's being provided for this initial period, it's really intended to be able to support partnership development as well as the work of a partnership to come together and form a strategy that can expand youth apprenticeship programs in a region or state. To those ends, we understand a couple things. One, that takes capacity in people. So obviously costs of people's time to be able to organize those partnerships, various other types of services and learning involved with going to visit other sites, pulling various partners together that'll be a part of this work are very important. At the same time, we do understand that in some cases where you are starting a new program, there can be some auxiliary costs to actual getting programs off the ground. It is very clear that these funds are not to be used to support the wages of apprentices, but the other major program costs associated with youth apprenticeship programs include some of the tuition or what's often called related instruction costs for post-secondary education. And in some cases, we are making it possible to use these resources to support those costs. However, we do encourage people to not think of these resources, particularly given the level they're at, as a way to substitute out building out a more sustainable way to fund this work through existing public or private funding streams, the other philanthropic dollars, leveraging CTE, dual enrollment coursework funds, state higher education funds, even to some extent other sort of federal grants that have been made available to support apprenticeship programs. So that is the top line answer. There's more information that also breaks this out specifically in some of our FAQ documents on our website too.
Thank you, Brent. Another question from my friend Wendy Levy with Arts to Work. They're doing digital media apprenticeships. She's wondering about how a full-time high school junior or senior does all their school requirements and also participates in an apprenticeship program. What does their schedule look like? So fortunately in North Carolina, we do have dual enrollment. So if you're enrolled in a college course, it counts for your high school credits as well. Oftentimes we have to work very closely with their career counselors to change their schedule to make sure that the college classes they take are going to help them to meet their high school graduation requirements. And I will not lie to you, it becomes a rigorous academic endeavor for the students. So it really is amazing to me how the students kind of self-select because of the rigor of the program. Elizabeth, would you like to add anything with that?
Sure. I would just like to reiterate what Pam said, is that we do have students that at times spend a little bit of time at the high school during the day, a little bit of time at their industry during the day, and a little bit of time at the community college during the day. We also have other models where they may be at their industry in the afternoon, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and at their community college, Tuesday, Thursday, and they have a first block class at their high school. But again, that's an important piece regarding consortia and partnerships, because when the partnership comes to the community college and the school district and says this is what they need, then everybody's able to work out these schedules together in the best interest of the students.
Great. So I think that's all the questions we have for now. It's certainly never too late if you want to email a question in to the info@nationalfund.org. We can reach back out to you directly, but I want to take a minute to thank Brent and Elizabeth both for participating. They both have a wealth of knowledge on this subject. I'm happy to help in any way I can as well. I've actually put together their email addresses along with mine on this last page of the slide deck. As I said before, this webinar was recorded and it will be converted and placed on our nationalfund.org website under apprenticeship resources, where we have our other webinar series that we have done before. So I thank you all, and everybody have a wonderful day.